Hello everybody, this is Farragon, and I'm going to be giving a brief explanation on how to play Arcane Mage in Uldir. Um, yeah, this is going to be PvE only. Since it's going to be in raid, it's going to focus primarily on single target because that's the way you'll use Arcane in a raid environment. If you're looking to do more AoE, Fire and Frost have uh, better performances. Right off the top of my head, for example, I'd say for Mythic Vectis, you're going to get more priority out of playing Frost Mage with Splitting Ice for add damage and cleaving off onto the boss. And for Zekvaz, you're going to have more damage for the adds, so you can burn them down, have higher add priority or add control. And you can certainly do well on Mythic Vectis with Arcane, but you wouldn't be using the playstyle that I'll be describing here. This is going to be strictly for single target, and that's about it. So now that we got that out of the way, we can get into talents. Uh, the talents are pretty much set in stone, if I say so myself. You could argue the Arcane Familiar does comparable, if not more, damage than Rule of Threes. But Rule of Threes really smooths out the gameplay in a way that is um, just really beneficial. The way it works is whenever you gain your third Arcane Charge, and Arcane Charge is generated through Arcane Blasts. So you build those by casting one, and as you can see, my charges on my weak aura here are building up. Now that when I'm at my third one, you can watch my mana here, I'll cast my fourth one, and it won't cost me any mana. Now this is important because when you are low on your mana or in your rest phase, and you're trying not to use any mana, in fact you're trying to gain some back through your mastery, uh, the fact that your fourth Arcane Blast doesn't cost any mana is huge. It makes your rest phase so much more easier to just to deal with. And from all the logs that I've seen, Rule of Threes is basically the go-to talent on this tier. Now we got tier 30. This is kind of a meme because you're gonna have a hard time convincing any mage not to take Shimmer, ever. Mana Shield has some very niche uses. One of the biggest things, it's very popular in PvP, but from a PvE perspective, the only time I've ever used Mana Shield was for second boss in Temple of Sethralus. And the second boss, basically what can happen is you can get stunned in the bad on the ground, and basically if you blink while you have the Mana Shield thing, it reduces your CC, and you'll be able to blink right out of that CC. Really helpful. Split Stream, it can be useful. I've seen a lot of people use it. It basically, whenever you get a clear casting proc, and you'll see it around here where my mouse is hovering. If you play Arcane, you should know what it looks like. You'll be able to cast Arcane Missiles on the go while moving, and Evocation can also be cast while moving. Now, that's really nice because I just finished with my Fetid prog. Mythic Fetid, that is, and one thing that really chafed me the wrong way was I used Evocation just before we got knocked back, and so I was at 0 mana, and I used Evocation, and then I was at 10% mana, and it was cancelled because I got knocked back. If I had run Split Stream, that wouldn't have happened, but Shimmer is just way too useful, especially for that fight, because positioning is everything, getting to the adds, but that's not what this video is about. Slipstream has a time and a place, but 99% of the time you're going to see Shimmer. The same can be said for Rune of Power in this tier. Mirror Image you're never going to take. 2-minute cooldown doesn't line up nicely with our 1.5-minute cooldowns on our Arcane Power. So it just makes it awkward. But Rune of Power is on a 40-second recharge. So you can basically guarantee by either just holding your Rune of Power that you'll have one for your Arcane Power. Also, they both last 10 seconds, which is really nice. So you'll know if you'll have it for the duration of your Arcane Power. Encounter's Flow it can be handy, especially if you're concerned about your positioning. Basically, Encounter's Flow is kind of like the pick and forget, though you can play around it a lot. Basically, what it does is that it cycles through 5 stacks, and each stack that it has, it increases your damage, all your damage by 4%, multiplying up to 20% at 5 stacks, and it goes through a cycle every 10 seconds. So it'll go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then back down again. And so it's a flow. It's an Encounter's Flow, and you can use that. I would think it's easier to use to play around as Frost, uh, because your damage is much more consistent as Arcane. Where for Frost Mage, a lot of your damage comes from your bursty glacial spikes. Where if you're in your CDs, your damage is going to be very consistent, and it's weird to play around with Encounter's Flow that way. For the next tier, Charged Up is basically all you're going to want to take, especially single target. Resonance is an AoE. This is lackluster. I don't really like using it. It doesn't feel good in the rotation. But Charged Up immediately grants 4 arcane charges. So at the beginning of a pull, all you have to do is hit arcane or Charged Up, and you'll have four arcane charges, and you'll be ready to go straight into your arcane power and your CDs. So you can have a very healthy first pull. Next tier is basically up to you. In a raid setting, which is generally what this guide is about, you're not going to get much benefit out of Ring of Frost or Ice Ward. It's raid utility, but if there's anyone that does roots, they do it better than us, and Ring of Frost gets canceled by damage anyway. So that's unimpressive in a raid setting. But Chrono Shift is singular, and it doesn't. It only helps you. But, well, I guess you could say that it slows ads by 50%, but that's not, I don't know, that's lackluster in my opinion. Basically, it just increases your movement speed by 50% when it hits the target. That's important. It won't do it as soon as you cast it. I'll try and get kind of far away here. So if I'm all the way back here, and I cast it, I'm moving, I don't get the movement speed there until it hits. Kind of something you might want to take into consideration. It's nice having the extra movement speed. I don't use it all the time since we're mages and we have double blink with Shimmer, but it is what it is. It's nice. Then we have Touch the Magi. This is basically the only thing I see people take as well. This one is obviously AoE, which is neat. And this one is also it's a single target, but also kind of lackluster. Also takes a lot of mana. But Touch of the Magi, arcane, basically it just puts a bomb on it or whatever you want to say. It stores damage and then releases it, I guess is the best way to explain it. It's a plug and forget talent. And then we get to the last tier. You're going to want to take Overpowered. Throughout the logs that I've seen, I don't really see anyone that takes Arcane Orb or Time Anomaly at all. Arcane Orb maybe on some AoE fights, but since we're doing single target here, Overpowered is going to be insane. It increases your arcane power. Your arcane power increases your damage by 60% and reduces the mana cost by 60%. And that's basically what makes the bread and butter Arcane Mage as of today, as of current in Mythic Uldir. Now I want to talk about the PvP talents because I use these a lot when I'm doing open world content. I think this is probably why I personally only play Arcane Mage in open world content. And it's in part to do with, one, you can kill things really quickly because you have a lot of upfront damage, and you don't really have to worry about your mana, and so you can kill things quickly, obviously was the point there. But these defensives PvP talents are really insane. So Master of Escape reduces your cooldown of your greater invisibility by 45 seconds. So now instead of it being, geez, what is it off of the... It's 2-minute CD when you are when you don't take Master of Escape. When you do take Master of Escape, it lowers by 45 seconds. So you're at a 1 minute 20 second CD basically. Then there's Temporal Shield. Not much to say about it. It's incredibly useful. It's the only reason I killed an elite mob, which if you don't know what I'm referencing to, let's see if I can find one. One of these mobs with the little dragon around them, they usually find a group for. I soloed one, and that's in part to do with, correct use of healing potions and Temporal Shield. Basically what happens is that any damage that you take for 6 seconds will be just provided back to you. It's like having a shield, but a shield that you can die with. Um, so you want to make sure that you're going to be surviving with the next 6 seconds, but you also want to make sure that you're taking a significant amount of damage so that when you use it on this 45-second cooldown that you're getting a lot of benefit out of it. And then back to this one is mass invisibility on a 1-minute cooldown. Basically, you have 2 invises now. It's not impressive. It only lasts for 5 seconds, and dealing damage will cancel the effect. Not that you can really cast much within those 5 seconds anyway. But the idea between Master of Escape and Mass Invisibility is that you can get out of combat basically whenever you want. If you accidentally pull too much in a world quest, or you're trying to take on an elite mob, and you're like, ooh, maybe this is this is a little extra. I don't think I can handle it. You can just pop either of these invis spells. If you're getting gimped by world PvP, maybe you're not experienced in PvP, and you're just having a hard time out in the real world, and you see an alliance or a horde, depending on what faction you are, and they're targeting you, you just pop invis. It's only on a minute 20 cooldown, and it lasts for what do I want to say, 20 seconds? Yes. So yeah, great 2 abilities, and the best part is that both of them drop combat. Basically, if I'm just running to a world boss or something like that, and I've got a ton of ads behind me, I'll just pop mass invis, because I'll go invisible for 5 seconds, and that's not very impressive, but it does drop all aggro, and I love it a lot. And this one, you can take whatever you want. I take Gladiator's Medallion, because I tend to fight people in open world, and this is the most useful trinket for me. Or trinket, that's what they used to call it. This is the best CC adjustment that I have. Now, talking about talents, another really important thing that goes along with that is Azerite traits, as I'm sure you're aware. Now, with Mage, just across the board, you kind of want to have 1 Archive of the Titans, and that's the one you get from Uldir. Basically, what it does is that it'll give you the Archive of the Titans buff, and it analyzes combat data every 5 seconds, blah blah blah, increasing your primary stat by 12, stacking up to 20 times. So yeah, it's a ton of intellect, basically, and there's no way around it. You want to have at least 1, especially in a raid setting, because if you don't have 1, you won't get the Reorigination Array stack. We'll get to that in a second. Now, the other 2, the best in slot 1 would be Galvanizing Spark. Since Arcane Blast does the majority of our damage, this is really nice because it just gives an additional damage to our Arcane Blast. But another important part that really it's a big DPS increase is the fact that it gives an 8% chance to generate a second arcane charge that stacks. So I have 2, so I have a 16% charge to generate a secondary arcane charge. And basically what that means is that if I'm casting Arcane Blast, instead of just getting 1 for a cast that I did, I'll sometimes get 2. So I'll just kind of see if I can bait one out here. You can watch my weak aura here, I'll tell you how many stacks I have. Yeah, it's when you're taking a video that you don't get lucky. We'll go for 1 more rotation. If it doesn't work out, I'm sure you guys get the gist. Yeah, unluck. But basically, arbitrarily, if I got 1 now, it'd jump to 2. If I got 1 now, it'd jump to 3. If I got 1 now, it'd jump to 4. You get the idea. And that's really nice for our rest phase, because it pops out more arcane barrages, and it also gets us to our 4th arcane charge faster, and that's when we're going to do our max damage with our arcane blast. And of course, with rule of 3s, we're going to get that 4th one for free anyway, so it saves mana by having to cast less, but still getting to that maximum charges faster. It's just all around good. Yeah, so you want to really look out for Galvanizing Spark. I like to run 2 of them, and then 1 Archive of the Titans. So now we'll get into secondary stats. And Arcane Mage is a tricky beast when it comes to secondary stats. Right now, what I've been mostly trying to push for is get a bit of crit, primarily focus on crit and then also have verse in my back pocket. I just have haste. I have a lot of haste, which I would prefer to have as versatility. But mastery is also important. It increases your mana regeneration rate, and it also increases your maximum mana by both of them by 20.7%. So you'll see, usually for mages, I'm not sure other classes, but I'm sure warlock or I can't think of the others off the top of my head, but I know for a fact that like mage and warlock start with a stock 100k intellect, and as you can see right here, I have 120.7k, and that's because I get 20% 0.7% more due to my mastery. Now it also increases arcane charge, increases the damage of your arcane blast and by an additional 10.3%, and the arcane barrage by 5.2%. So basically, your mastery also increases your damage on your main damaging ability by 5% if you have your mastery at 20%. And that's a big deal. So the point I'm trying to get across here is that it's not cut and dry, and that any of these stats can become more important than the other depending on what they're at. Now, the best way that I know how to figure out how to work around that is by simming my character. And if you're playing Arcane Mage and you don't sim, I would highly recommend that you start. Basically, you can download an add-on called Simulation Craft, and you type into your chat SimC, and it'll open up this nice code, and you just copy it with Control C. You hit OK, and then you go to a third-party website like RaidBots, and you put in the code where it gives you like a little box, and you hit enter, and it'll run that code, and it'll tell you what your most optimal DPS would be. Basically, it runs a bunch of iterations using a little bit of RNG, because Arcane has a little RNG with our clear casting. The more you get, the more damage you're gonna do, basically. And RaidBots does all the heavy lifting for you, and it'll do like thousands of iterations, and it'll tell you your average of those iterations. But more importantly, for your secondary stats, arbitrarily right off the bat, I'll say that right now I'm simming for about 17k DPS, very roughly, over a 5-minute fight. And that's patchwork, and that means it's not counting my character as moving at all. It's meaning my character is stood still the entire time and having perfect casting and all that. So 17k is not something I reach regularly. On a single target fight for 5 minutes, I would say I'd sit around 15k is where my performance is. So, the difference between simming and being perfect and human error is about 2k difference in my Arcane Mage play. And that's something I try every day to close. Close the gap, try and make it as best as possible. So the best thing about simming is that it'll show your secondary stat weights, and those will tell you basically at this. So looking exactly at my 18.4 crit, my 11.10 haste, my 7.8 versatility, my 20.6 mastery, what would be most beneficial for my damage right now to get over the other? So it might tell me that my versatility is way more important than my haste, and that I should push for more versatility. And those stat weights is the jargon that's used. It jumps around all the time as Arcane Mage, so simming your character regularly when you get a new piece of loot is really important. That being said, because they all have similar stat weights, you can generally kind of put in your highest item level piece. This is kind of a workaround if you don't want to get into simming. On Arcane Mage, you can generally put in your best item level. As you can see, I'm 385.5 out of my bagged 384. And that's only because I'm using it for stuff with sockets. As you can see, I've got 385 legs. When I've got... that was a bad example. Those are my best legs. My best example, I guess, would be this 380 offhand with a socket. And I've got a 385 with similar stats. It's going to give me more intellect, more stamina, more crit, but it's got a socket. You generally want to take a lower item level with a socket over a higher item level that doesn't. So carrying on. An important part about Uldir is the reorigination array stacks. And the way you get that is by doing bosses every week. And for example, my reorigination array stacks are at 10. So when I walk into Uldir, I'll get a nice little buff that has a little 10 by it, and if I hover over it, it'll tell me what it does. And basically, reorigination array, since I'm not in Uldir right now, it gives me a boost stacking, and I've got 10 stacks since I've done raids every week of secondary stat. It'll take the highest one you have, and I have Deja Vu character stats. It's an add-on, so I can hover over and I can see that crit is my highest at 968. That's important because you can see that it's only giving me 13.4% crit, but I have 18.4 either way. This is what my gear is giving me, and that's the important part for the reorigination array stacks. It doesn't matter what your highest secondary stat is, because as you can see, mine's mastery, but I only have 11% mastery coming from my gear, or 665. So therefore, my reorigination array will give me crit, because I have 968 crit from my gear, but only 665 mastery. And you can see that's similar for haste, 755 compared to 968, and 667 for versatility. I like this way because when I walk into Uldir, I now get critical strike as my reorigination array secondary stat bonus, and because I have 10 stacks, that pops me from 18.4% crit roughly to like 30 to 32%, and that is really massive. Critting when you're in when you're using arcane power bumps your damage by an insane amount. I mean, it doubles whatever the cast was supposed to do. How is that not good? So yeah, that's how the reorigination array kind of works.
Mic off. Mic on.
All right, so now we're gonna get into a bit of the play style. A couple of important things to remember is that we're taking Rune of Power. So if we're using our cooldowns, we want to make sure that we're standing on top of it. Another big thing that's in tandem with using our cooldowns is using any racials that we have. My racial is on a 2-minute cooldown because I'm Mag'har Orc. Doesn't work too well with Arcane, but what can you do? But on my first Arcane power, I'm going to make sure that I'm using my Ancestral Call, my racial, along with it. If I use my Arcane power within the next minute and a half, I'll still have 30 seconds on my Ancestral Call, so I won't use it for that one, but I will have it for the third one, guaranteed. So yeah, our burst phase, if I just talk it out really quick, is we're going to pre-pot, if we do a pull timer, around 1 second to 2 seconds, depending on how scumbag your guild is. If you notice that, your guild tends to pull on 2 as instead of 0 when we're supposed to, you're going to want to pre-pot a little bit earlier, because if you pre-pot when the boss is in aggro, then you've lost your chance to get 2. Obviously, I've got potions of prolonged power, but I also have potions of intellect, so no one yell at me, please. So yeah, you're going to want to pre-pot about 1 second or 2 second. Now this is really important, is that you don't want to use your charged up until the boss is aggroed. What it'll do is that if you use it before the boss is aggroed, it'll show you that you have 4 stacks, but the second that the boss goes into is aggroed, or goes into combat is the word I was looking for, you will jump down to 1 stack of arcane charges, which defeats the whole purpose of the whole purpose of taking charged up in the first place. So you want to make sure, but you also want to time it in a way that it's as close to when the boss gets into combat as possible. It's a very fine line, because you want to get to doing DPS as fast as possible. So I'll use a pre-pot at about 1 second. I'll then use charged up when the boss is aggroed. I'll then put down a Rune of Power, and then I'll use my Presence of Mind. Presence of Mind causes your next 2 Arcane Blasts to be instant cast. Crazy important. Also one thing, one thing that's important to realize is that you don't have to use it at the beginning of your cooldowns. You just want to make sure that you're using it during your CDs at some point, because you're getting two for the price of 1. Because basically you get 2 casts within what would have been 1 cast, which is a beautiful thing. So you want to make sure you're using Presence of Mind somewhere along the way. I tend to use it at the beginning. You can use it kind of whenever within the 10 seconds of your arcane power that you want. So then we're obviously going to use arcane power, our racial, any unused trinkets. I have 2 passive trinkets, so I won't be. And then we'll be going into our arcane blast spam. And now what that will look like is I will do, let's just do pull 5.
4, 3,
So I'll pre-pot,
1.
charged up, rune of power, presence of mind, arcane power, racial, and then I'm into my arcane blast spam. We're just going to use this as much as possible. If we get a clear casting, we're not going to use it within our arcane power. And then after that, we're going to drop down another rune of power and then go back into our into dumping our arcane blasts. If you're not in your arcane power, you're going to want to use those arcane missiles as soon as they pop up. And then you dump your charges by using arcane barrage. So now, what happens when you're out of mana and you don't have evocation up? Basically you're out of mana, you don't have evocation up, so you can't spam. What does the rotation look like? That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. So you're just going to want to stay casting Arcane Blast as usual. You're going to be wanting using clear casting procs as they arise. But when you get to 4 stacks, you're just going to want to dump them. And this is the best way to kind of gradually gain mana back, because obviously oh, did you see that? That was my Galvanizing Spark. I went from 2 to 4, just so you guys can see that. So we're just going to be gradually going up to 4, and you're going to say, hey, you're not doing a lot of damage here. That's right. That's because we're a very bursty class. You can very clearly dissect Arcane Mage gameplay into burn phases and rest phases. Your burn phases are when you're going to be standing on top of a rune of power, and your rest phases are when you are not standing on a rune of power. That is incredibly important. Now, there's going to be times where there's a priority target. The one that's most fresh in my mind would be Fetid Devour on Mythic. Those ads need to die, and they need to die quick. So what do? I do not use my CDs on pull, because they spawn at 55 seconds. If I used my Arcane Power, I would still have... I'm really bad at mental math. But I would still have 35 seconds left in my Arcane Power before I get to do damage on them, and by then they're already dead, or Fetid is already eating it and it's a wipe. So what I do is I hold it, and I make sure that I'm in position and ready to drop my Arcane Power when it needs to be done. Now the second ads spawn before your Arcane Power is back up, so what do? Well, what I do have up is my Presence of Mind at that time, and I'm going to make sure that I have 4 stacks going in, so I'll pop my Charged Up. I'll make sure that I'm stood on top of a Rune of Power. I'll use my Presence of Mind, and I will spam the ever-living crap out of that ad with anything that I can. And if you're standing on a Rune of Power, it's best to be dumping as much mana as possible, because you're doing 40% increased damage, and that's incredibly important. Yeah, so basically, I guess I'll get into your general single target rotation. This is one that I use on Talak because it's about as single target as you're gonna get with some rest phases. But what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna give a general example. It's hard for me to speak and do it at the same time because a lot of things are happening at once. So I'll just show you a quick clip of what I would do. Obviously patchwork, I'm going to try and stand still. I like to wiggle, but I'll try not to. Of what I would do for Talak.
4, 3, 2, 1.
So now we're into our spam. Not going to use this proc until now. Going to use another Rune of Power. And now I'm going to try and get to as low as mana as possible. That's where we run into a tricky spot with the arcane dummy, or the raiding dummy. Is that when I use evocation, it's gonna reset my my meters. But I'll show you the overall in a sec. I'm gonna make sure that I have my charged up back up again. I'm gonna use my rune of power again. See how it kind of lines up nicely there? You have your rune of power and you're charged up or back off of cooldown just after you've kind of run out of mana with and then you've used evocation. So now see I have a long cooldown on my rune of power. It's gonna be about you can see down here it's 20 seconds. That's about when my arcane power comes up. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna conserve my mana here. I don't really want to be spending a lot of mana because I'm not standing on a rune of power and I'm not getting my best worth out of it, is the way I kind of want you to think about that. So I'm just going to be dumping it with Arcane Barrage. I'm going to be using clear casting procs as they come. I'm going to hold on to this rune of power until I'm ready for my arcane power. And I'm going to get to 4 stacks here. I'm going to dump them. I'm going to use Arcane Charge, or Charged Up, go into a rune of power, use my CDs, and I'm going to go back into my burn phase. And then you can see evocations coming back up. So I want to make sure that I'm kind of low on mana when that does. So I'm thinking to myself, well, what's coming up soon? My rune of power is coming off of CD soon. So I'm going to wait. And I'm going to get 4 charges just as that CD comes back up. Use my rune of power and then dump my mana as much as possible. I will use clear casting procs while I'm on top of a rune power as they come. But generally you want to make sure you're out of mana when your evocation comes up. And this is about the best kind of general single target you're going to get out of. And that's about it. That is the bread and butter of single target Arcane Mage. It is a lot of fun. I personally think that is harder, much harder than the other 2 specs, even though it gets memed upon, due to it being literally, you know, just, oh, that is damage from earlier. That's unfortunate. Does this? Yes. But you can see, let's see for one of my, so right here, Arcane Blast, it did 83% of my damage. And people are going to say, oh, well, you're just spamming one button. How can that be fun? But that's not what you're thinking about. The spamming one button is obviously brainless. What you're thinking about is your mana consumption, how you're using it, when you're using it, and what you're using it for. And I think that's a really cool play style, and it's something that has really kept me on my toes. So I hope that you guys learned something. And if you have any questions, ask in the comments below. If you want to see a Fire or Frost Mage guide, I am proficient at both of those, and I could also give a guide on those if you guys are interested. I would love to hear your feedback, and I'll catch you next time.